Hi guys, Coach Christo here. I'm making this video today to talk a little bit about resistance training as I think it should relate to soccer players. Now there's a ton of research that can either be directly or indirectly linked to soccer. I'm going to put some of this research in the description below. I'll also pop some on the screen as we go through. I can't include all of it, but the important thing to take away is that it's overwhelmingly positive. Now, this should have reversed some previous perceptions that resistance training was dangerous and ineffective, but the sad reality is that despite all the evidence, resistance training remains far from common practice. Endurance athletes, children, and females have as much to gain as anyone, and maybe more in some cases, from resistance training. But these are some of the groups that miss out on those benefits from resistance training more than any others. Soccer players are endurance athletes. A lot of soccer players are children, and a lot of soccer players are females. So obviously, soccer players, are a group that also, fails to capitalize on those benefits from resistance training. And, soccer players have also been, called out as their own group that either, they fail to resistance train very often, or the resistance training that they do is, not a very good quality. They could be getting a lot more from this resistance training. Even athletes who do resistance train, they usually don't start until, about freshman year of high school, which means they're already missing out on years of benefits that they could be getting. Better to start late than never, but they're still missing out on some of the benefits. Studies on college freshmen show that athletes, who start at college are not prepared for the rigors of that, high level of sport. And resistance training in high school is cited as one of the ways that they can, be better prepared. Obviously, I'd argue that they should start even sooner than that. But the fact is that most athletes, even in high school, aren't resistance training. Now, before we dive into the benefits, it's important to point out that there really are no negatives to resistance training. There's no evidence that it's dangerous, even for children. It just isn't. Would I have a 5-year-old testing their 1 rep max deadlift? Probably not. But my niece is 6 years old and she fools around with her 5-pound barbell and she has a lot of fun with it. And she's been doing that for, over a year. Resistance training is incredibly safe. If you look at injury rates in different sports, weightlifting and powerlifting are near the bottom with very few injuries. And guess what's at the top? Soccer. There's a non-zero chance of injury when you're resistance training, but resistance training actually reduces injury rates. So, some people are gonna get injured doing resistance training, but those injuries and more, will be avoided if they're resistance training. The most common injury when resistance training is actually dropping a dumbbell on your foot. We can probably avoid that by being a little bit careful or not using dumbbells. The injuries that happen in soccer are a lot harder to avoid. People don't tear their ACLs because they're not being careful when they're playing soccer. Apart from fear of injuries because of resistance training, people also seem to be concerned that doing a lot of resistance training will hurt your endurance or your soccer performance in some way. Now, there's a little bit of evidence that doing a lot of endurance training will hurt your performance in resistance training, but it doesn't work the other way around. Some studies even show resistance training helping to improve endurance, and at worst, the effect is probably neutral. To be honest, I don't recommend resistance training because I think it's going to, help a soccer player's endurance. The other benefits are a lot bigger and a lot more definite, but it definitely doesn't hurt. So let's get into those benefits. Decreased risk of injury, improved athletic performance, and mental health benefits. So we'll start with reduced injury rates, and this is something I'm really passionate about. So I've had 3 major surgeries. And obviously, I've picked up some smaller injuries in between, and some small knocks in between those big injuries. I spent years on the sidelines, and those were some of the toughest times in my life, not being able to play, it was really hard. If there's any way that you can avoid an injury, you need to do it. One of the most common things I hear from players is that I don't have time to resistance train. Well, do you have time to sit on the sideline and watch your team play when you're not able to? So yeah, soccer is an amazing sport. I love soccer. But the fact is that injury rates in soccer, as I mentioned before, very, very high. So this makes resistance training for soccer players even more important than it might be for athletes in some other sport. And also, on top of that, sports specialization brings with it an inherent increase in injury risk. So if soccer is your only sport, resistance training becomes even more important. So resistance training reduces general rates of injury for young soccer players, but it also decreases rates of specific injuries that are incredibly common in soccer players. Tendinopathy is a super common injury, and this is something I dealt with myself after my ACL repair. I had patellar tendinopathy, and it was so painful at times that I remember thinking that I wouldn't be able to play again. Resistance training is one of the few ways to actually alleviate this pain. The only downside is that the program has to be at least 3 months long. Obviously, in my opinion, that's not a downside because you should be resistance training anyway. Strains, also super common, and I've dealt with this, in my career. And exercises like Nordics and Copenhagen's have a lot of support for reducing the rates of hamstring and adductor strains, respectively. Now, resistance training also increases bone mineral density, which is important because endurance athletes, including soccer players, are at an increased risk of low bone mineral density. Low back pain is another super common problem in youth soccer. And again, resistance training can be a great response to that pain, or you could do it preemptively and maybe not have to deal with that at all. The last thing I'd like to mention in terms of injuries is that resistance training is a great way for soccer players to stay at least somewhat in shape if they are injured. After my surgeries, I was doing things like single leg squats, and deadlifts, even in a cast or when I was, on crutches, to try to be as active as I could be. And exercises like that, not only do they help the uninjured leg, there's actually evidence that they help the injured leg. So you can avoid some atrophy that way, and obviously be a lot more, a lot better prepared when you come back to, to start to play again, if you had just done nothing. Moving on to performance benefits, again, there are a lot of them, and I can't go into all of them here, but I'll go over some of the really important ones. Obviously some are going to be a little bit more relevant to soccer. But resistance training can make you faster over shorter distances. So, 10 meters, 15 meters. There's also a lot of evidence that, it will make you better at changing directions. So, changing direction skills can be really, really improved through resistance training. And these two things, running short distances and changing direction constantly, that's what soccer is. There's also evidence that it can increase your vertical jump. So when you're going up for things like headers, can help you out there as well. And like I said, these things are just so crucial to soccer. On to mental health. And this is, again, something I'm really passionate about, and something I struggled with myself as a player at times. Sport can be really stressful at any level. If you're playing at a high level, obviously it's going to be stressful, but players experience stress even at lower levels, even in youth sports. Again, any way to ease that burden, I want to look into it. Resistance training seems to be a very promising way to relieve stress, improve general well-being, and improve confidence. And confidence in particular is something I talk about all the time. And it's so important, for athletes to perform well. Also, athletes can be at risk for depression, especially if they aren't able to play, or if they play badly, maybe. If they retire, if they get injured, and resistance training can help with depression as well. I know that when I was injured and I couldn't kick a ball around, resistance training was a really, really productive outlet for me. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about what a resistance training should look like for a soccer player. Ideally, you would resistance train about twice a week. You can do less, you can do more, and obviously one session is infinitely better than none. But I recommend, twice a week, and maybe, we can increase depending on the athlete. I would start with some plyometric work if possible. One day I would do something like bunny hops, and one day I would do something like drop jumps. Obviously, there are other plyometrics that you can do. I like to start with these because there's some good evidence behind them, and they're pretty simple and easy to learn. Sometimes with younger players, I like to make it, a little bit of a, maybe a race, or, I add in some ball work during the plyometric work, and that makes it a little bit more fun for them. But, you can do what you want. One day I would do a bilateral squat, so on both legs. Now that could be a traditional squat, could be a front squat. The exercise itself isn't what's important. It's just the movement. Then on day 2, I would do a unilateral squat, so something on one leg. So that would be something like a split squat, maybe a Bulgarian split squat, or maybe a pistol squat. Obviously, for all of these exercises, there are, body weight exercises you can do if you can't get to the gym or don't have access to a gym, or you can get a set of bands and use those, as well. I would also deadlift on both days. So one day I would do a bilateral deadlift, something like, just a regular deadlift or maybe a trap bar deadlift. And then on the other day, I would do a single leg deadlift. So obviously, I would organize these. So I would do bilateral deadlift first on one day, and then the unilateral squat. And then on the other day, I would do the bilateral squat and then the unilateral deadlift. So for a single leg deadlift, I would probably do something like a Romanian deadlift with dumbbells or with a band for resistance. And then I would move on to some smaller movements. So something for hamstrings, something for calves, and something for adductors. Your best bets here are, something like Nordics for hamstrings. You'd also do some, ball curls that I'll show here. And then you could also do, single leg calf raises for calves. That's, one that I think is really, really great. And then for adductor work, you can do Copenhagen's. Now you can also, optionally add in some core work. And, if we're doing more days, I might add in some upper body work, but that's not really the focus here. You can probably get through these sessions in an hour tops. Maybe you could do it in, 30 minutes to 45 minutes, depending, again, what you're doing and how advanced you are. But it's not going to take a lot of time. And, the benefits are so, so real that I think this is something that every soccer player should be doing. And it's just so important as a soccer player to do some kind of resistance training. Okay, so you put your knees on the bench here. Okay, and I'm gonna hold your legs, and you're just gonna lower yourself down to the floor. And you're gonna catch yourself with your hands. Okay. Good job. You okay?
Yep.
Good. Good. All right, now one thing, just try to keep, so from your knees to your chest, you need to keep a straight line the whole way if you can. Okay, so we're not gonna bend here, we're gonna stay straight. Can we try that? Okay. Good job, Sadie, that was perfect. Good, little bit slower. Good, one more. Good, well done. And you're free. You want to do the horsey jumps again? All right, let's do it.